My name's Alasdair Fraser. I graduated from the University of Aberdeen in 2017. I studied initially economics and management studies, but changed course in my second year and moved to politics and international relations. I now work at the NatWest Group and I look after customer due diligence for its fintech division, NatWest Boxed.
Thank you very much. And why did you choose Aberdeen to study at university?
I chose Aberdeen because it was, I think, my sixth or seventh option, and I didn't get any of my first five options. I was relatively good academically at school, but I had a lot of distractions and I didn't achieve really anything close to my predicted grades, and ended up just salvaging my results using my AS results. My A levels didn't turn out very well. So I was in the position where I could go through clearing or I could try and call round the unis that I did like but didn't put on my preferences and see if any of them had spaces
Mm.
before going through official clearing. And when I called Aberdeen, they had space on their economics and management study and I met the required grades. So while I was post my offer accepted, it wasn't through clearing. So I was lucky in that I didn't have to wait for any conditions to be met or anything like that. My letter came through the same day, which was nice. But a rather bumpy start that my parents didn't much like, and a bit stressful. And it did lead me to have slightly strange accommodation. I was in the postgraduate accommodation
Mhm.
with a bunch of other people who'd been through clearing or got last minute offers.
Yeah, that's very interesting story. Thank you. And what were some of your favorite memories from Aberdeen?
Oh, a good few barbecues in the dunes, out by the beach.
Mhm.
Definitely those. I worked a couple of quite fun PR gigs at some of the nightclubs. I doubt I know the names of them currently, but one of them was Institute. I can't for the life of me remember the name of the club now. And very fond memories of working in Garage, which I think is maybe now closed. But other than that, I had a couple of really great tutors, and some friends that I made on the courses, and sort of spending time with them, both socially and at uni, was absolutely great. But the one to trump them all is meeting my wife.
Mm.
She and I met in her third year and my second year, if that makes sense, and started dating soon after, and got married the 2 years ago. So
That's
it's
amazing.
been it's been a lovely time, and we pretty much have all the same friends from when we were at Aberdeen, so it's nice. We kept the same network of friends.
That's very nice. And what was your focus during your studies and how it influenced your professional approach?
So my main focus was initially, I think, quite misguided. So I was looking for something that would give me a sort of broad remit going into a sort of managerial career. My dad's in business overseas. He builds and runs hotels, and I kind of assumed as he had done, eventually I would go and work for my family business. But I soon arrived at the thought that that really wasn't where I wanted my life to go. And I really wasn't enjoying economics and management studies. I've always loved economics theory. I absolutely hate the maths. So I felt I could still get that theory part because a lot of economic theory is ideology at the end of the day. So I transitioned into politics and international relations, but I had a heavy emphasis on history and security. So that kind of sparked a, well, the passion was there, but it sparked a focused passion on, I guess, issues like international security, risk, and things like counterterrorism, which was turbo driven when I got later into my degree and I could choose my dissertation, which was like sending me to a sweetie shop. Someone gave me permission to write tens of thousands of words on a topic that only I would pick,
Mm.
and I could read as many books as I wanted about it. That sounded marvelous to me. So that very much struck a chord with me. I did have some illusions to becoming a journalist. Towards the end of university, I was the deputy news editor of the Gaudi. I wrote for a couple of online blogs through people I met at the Gaudi and through Grounding Ancients, which is a I was a copy editor for that. It's a sort of academic journal for students. I don't know if it's still going. And that sort of sparked me to think maybe I want to be a journalist. Tried my hand out at freelance journalism and realized that it was kind of a dead end if you're in a committed relationship, unless you have significant resources or scholarships and things like that. It's very difficult to live off of a stringer's salary as a couple and then not have to move around.
Yeah.
So I looked about, and the graduate pickings weren't great for me in the locations I wanted to be. So I just simply moved to my then girlfriend, now wife's hometown, and started working in a contact center while I figured out what I wanted to do. And that, through a series of fortunate events, led me to the graduate program at Barclays a couple of years after I graduated. And I landed a role in a financial crime operations team. And that instantly married my interests at university, which were all around risk management and security and counterterrorism and politics. I could do all of those things. So my first role was heavily involved in risk assessing politically exposed people. And that then sparked a passion that spanned the rest of my career.
That's amazing. Thank you. And can you tell us more about your time at Gaudi?
The Gaudi was fun. I definitely don't think I was the normal type. So because I changed degree and I was already sort of an older undergrad, because when I moved to the UK from overseas, I repeated a year. So I was a couple, maybe even 3 years older than some of the people there. I looked quite a bit older as well. I guess I had a feel of a mature student to me. I also started not in my first year like you have with sort of
Mhm.
student organizations. This was something I started very much at the end of my time at university.
Mhm.
I'd been in the squash society and been a social secretary there and had a lot of fun with that, but that wasn't serious. I loved squash and I loved going out and going
Fair
on
enough.
pub crawls. So this was something more of let's see if this thing that I fancied for a long time actually would work as perhaps a career. And it was a lot more fun than I anticipated, but equally, I don't know if it's the same now. There were a good amount of egos, and I don't think the people I work with there would mind me saying that. Some of them are pretty senior in either the press space or have gone on to fabulous careers, but they took it really, really seriously and they were great to work with. But at times, I guess my style wasn't serious enough for them. So on the one hand, I was doing the very staid sort of press release to news part as the deputy news editor, but I wrote a number of op-eds and features either under pseudonym or under my own name that were slightly more designed to rancor people. So one of the ones I wrote was a piece on the deficiencies of the Prevent program, which is a program of basically tattletaling that schools, universities, and other sort of society bodies have to do on their students or people associated with them, where they think they're becoming extremists. But the problem with that is its intention is to prevent extremism and therefore terrorism. In practice, what it does is it sort of cools people's ability to engage with challenging content. So I was studying politics and international relations. I was very friendly with professors in that space. I had an interest in radical Islam as an academic interest. Some of the things that I read, were those to be exposed to the Prevent officer at the university, would have likely ended up with me having quite a difficult conversation with someone. I just don't think that's acceptable. I think spotting someone being radicalized is relatively straightforward compared with a geek about security reading about Hamas or reading about Hezbollah. And I wrote quite a long piece, interviewed some academics, interviewed the university, and was pretty scathing. I then moved on to some slightly more on the nose pieces about Theresa May's Snoopers Charter, which was a sort of hot button topic when she was Home Secretary. A little bit on drone warfare and the ethics of that, which was what I wrote my dissertation on. So I had that angle. I also wrote a little bit about video games and online media and stuff like that. But I always tried to sort of take a bit of a stance that the assumed wisdom is often wrong, and that didn't always marry with what was a very basic student newspaper. Um, so when I left university, I moved into a political action organization, which had a blog, and I worked as a copy editor and contributor on that. I think campaign agent or something was my actual title because it was a campaigning organization called it was called Think Politics or something like that. I'll have to look up what it was called, or Talk Politics. It was run by a guy who's now a political consultant, who was a few years younger than me, and a couple of the folks from the Gaudi worked there, and they had a blog which you could write long form on. So I wrote a scathing piece on America's drone war. I wrote a couple of pieces on the war in Yemen, which was again a hot button topic then, it kind of still is. And that's kind of what fired me up about what is now my career. But definitely the journalism part fell to the wayside.
That's very interesting story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And next question is, what is NatWest Group? Can you describe it, please?
So older listeners or people from Scotland will probably know it as Royal Bank of Scotland, which is a pretty old bank. But recently they rebranded as NatWest rather than RBS Group. NatWest is just one of their legal entities within the group structure. So it's National Westminster Bank. It's an old English bank. Within the bank, they work on a sort of franchise basis. So franchises you may be familiar with are their retail franchise, which includes NatWest and RBS. They'll have Royal Bank of Scotland International, which is their international bank. That's a franchise. The newer, what they used to call ventures, were things like Esme Loans, which no longer exists, a short-lived fintech called Bow, which was a challenger to the likes of Monzo, and then Metal, which is their business banking app for self-employed people, which is a financial technology company offering an app-based business account. Out of that came the part of the bank I work in called NatWest Boxed, which is ostensibly a legal entity in the group, but it also supplies the technology behind our soon to come to market banking as a service proposition. So if you think of Starling's engine, or if you think of the likes of Clearbank, Griffin, these are all bank as a service players. And what they do is effectively take all the technology, compliance services, operations that you need to be a bank, and they sell it to organizations that don't have the resources to become a bank. So the example I like to use is, and I hope that Aldi aren't speaking to anyone in the industry about setting up a bank as a service, but if Aldi wanted to become a bank, they could become a bank, so they could go and get regulated status from the Financial Conduct Authority, and the Prudential Regulation Authority. They could then go and hire loads of people, build lots of technology, spend millions of pounds, and end up with yet another co-branded credit card or something at the checkout, or maybe a bank account like Tesco used to have. Or they could go to a bank as a service player who is basically a software as a service, a SaaS company that does banking, and say, I want to do current accounts and loans and savings accounts. Can you set me up those? I'll pay you several £1 million, and you onboard my customers, look after them, answer the phone when they ring, but everything's branded as Aldi. And that's the model we work under. So while I work within the NatWest Group, I don't work for RBS, so you won't ever see me in a branch or anything like that. The space I work in is purely digital, and it sits on a completely different technology estate from the rest of the group, which is a traditional bank, if you will.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And the next question is, can you describe your current role within the company? What do you do and your responsibilities?
So right now, my current role is looking after customer onboarding for both Metal, our business proposition, and NatWest Boxed, our bank as a service proposition. But one of my colleagues, one of the other senior managers, is on long-term leave. And as a consequence, I'm also looking after the in-life due diligence. So as a customer has the account, things will happen. They maybe change their regulated status. They maybe change the type of business entity they are, or perhaps one of them gets elected into parliament and they become a PEP, as we call it in industry, a politically exposed person. At that point, they will need to have due diligence conducted on them. So I look after both the start of the relationship and the ongoing maintenance of the relationship. Another colleague then looks after the investigations of money laundering. Between us, we would collectively be financial crime operations. So the operations division that looks after the management of financial crime. So my role's ostensibly there to protect the regulated status of the bank, make sure that we are following the regulations, following our bank policies. But equally, my team and I have a duty to prevent the financial system from being tainted with economic crime or the proceeds of crime. So what we do is effectively prevent fraudsters onboarding to the platform and defrauding people. We prevent criminals with dirty money from using our platform to launder it. And we prevent sanctioned individuals or unscrupulous public officials from either laundering money or using the banking system in nefarious ways. But equally, we're there to protect everyday consumers, make sure that they are being protected from organized crime and all the nasties out there. We also have a whole bunch of financial stuff that's really quite opaque and boring to ensure that we give people the right messages, that we ensure that they have all of the right documents about what payments we can offer them and things like that. But really, the main thing for me is stopping dirty money getting into the financial system is the main driver for me personally in my professional life.
That's great. Thank you. And what attracted you to join NatWest Group? And how did you
Um,
there?
so it's really quite a personal story. So I wasn't very Um, I wasn't enjoying my time at Monzo where I worked before. Not to say the company's at all a bad place to work. I have some really close friends who still work there, and it was brilliant to work with. But the company's growth is turbocharged, and that can often lead to people being expected to pick up more than their fair share of work. I had a new family. I wasn't seeing the sorts of progression that I was looking for. And I wasn't finding the role challenging in the right ways. Working lots of hours is challenging because it makes you tired, it makes you grumpy, but it's not intellectually stimulating. And I just took it as I'd given it my all for 13 months, wasn't enjoying it any longer, and said I need to find a new opportunity, whether that be somewhere else in Monzo or in the industry. And at the same time, I was on Slack, which is a DM platform that a lot of banks and sort of organizations use. And one of them was an industry body I'm a member of. And a job posting came up from my current boss saying he was looking for an onboarding lead to look after the onboarding of customers. Had a very sort of bespoke job ad. And I just direct messaged him and said, I'm really interested. Can we get some time to chat? Found out that we knew some people in the industry, so we had a good natter. Sounded like it was the right job for me. I went through a 3 or 4 stage interview process and was comfortably selected. So I had a great, very easy transition from what was a very intense environment that wasn't stimulating me the right way to what is now a very good work-life balance, but very intellectually challenging. So the types of scale that we're looking at, the types of efficiencies, both technical and operational, so getting people to be more efficient are big challenges to overcome, and it's a good set of challenges. It's not just bluntly a lot of work, it's a lot of thinking, planning, and being very careful with the risk that we take, which is much more stimulating for someone like me who thrives in detail rather than just I've worked 80 hours, look at me. I've never been much of a hustle person. I'd rather just have one job that I work hard at, that I'm good at, that rewards me fairly, and then have a work-life balance and spend time with my wife and kid.
That's great. Thank you. And the next question is, can you share some books, resources, or networks that would be beneficial for students who want to work in your type of career?
Absolutely. So, first book I will recommend is Moneyland by an author called Oliver Bullough. Um, It's probably one of the most attainable books on money laundering, illicit finance, and also talks a bit about monetary policy, banking regulation. But it's quite entertaining. If you want something that's a bit more sort of cut and thrust, you could try McMafia by Misha Glenny. They made a BBC show as well, which is a fictionalized version of the events covered in the book. The acting's sublime. It's a really good TV show. Podcasts. There's the Dark Money Files by Graham Barrow and Ray Blake. It's really popular in the industry. It gets a lot of views, but I don't know how much it's broken out into the sort of real world. But Graham in particular is featured on a lot of Panorama and other news reports around illicit finance. So he's maybe a face that nerds of the space would know. And then recently, for something slightly different, an author called Simon Cooper's brought out a couple of books. The first one that I have read, I've got the other one on my shelf, is called Chums, and it's about the sort of political class who came out of Oxbridge at a particular point in time. So most of the people he's writing about are somewhere between the ages of 45 and 65. So the ruling class of Britain today, and talking about some of the reasons for why we got a fundamental unseriousness in the UK around Brexit, where we got messages like Brexit means Brexit and let's get Brexit done without any real substance. It sort of talks to some of the concerns that the likes of Rory Stewart and Alasdair Campbell talk about, where if you sit in the center of politics or you sit either to the left or right, but you have a sort of more tame outlook on society, when you look at some of the things that have happened in our politics, even by people who outwardly used to be quite sensible, people are being dragged into culture wars and things like that. And why is that? Is it because they really believe in that, or is it because they were brought up in a sort of socioeconomical political class and went to university in a place where performance trumped substance? So this book talks about the Oxford Union and how it trained people to go into the House of Commons, but didn't train them actually how to deal with real people. It trained them how to debate, but not actually how to be substantive, how to govern. So the word chums is it's all the old chums who used to run the British Empire, and these are the newest generation. The problem is there is no British Empire, and the world is a much scarier, more complex place, and they're still trying to run it as a bunch of old boys. So tangential to my industry in that it reveals a little bit about sort of the dark money flows and who's who, but it also just talks about the last 40 years of our politics and where these people came from. So it touches on a bunch of public figures, and I'd say it's a great read. The guy himself was there at the time in Oxford, and it kind of rounds out those other more serious books that I mentioned at the start.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And the next question is, how did financial crimes evolve since you started your career?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to use the example of politically exposed persons, and I'm also then going to use the example of let's say crypto. So when I started my career, crypto was the bogeyman to every high street bank. Some of them had divisions that were dabbling with it. So some of them banked some of the big exchanges, didn't really understand how they worked. There wasn't a lot of governance or rules around how it operated. No one had considered the liquidity risks or anything like that. And none of the massive scandals had really broken into the public at that point. But as we moved, I was sort of working in major banks around the time when banks started to have a risk appetite. Which parts of crypto would they deal with? Which ones would they not deal with? We started to become able to risk assess and monitor crypto flows, and sort of decide who the good guys and the bad guys were. Companies like Chainalysis came out, and they brought out tools where law enforcement and intelligence functions within banks could monitor where money was going, and things became a bit more understood. We then had a series, and it was a rolling series that hasn't really ended, of basically implosions of crypto companies. And that's demonstrated that if you look like a bank, you quack like a bank, you're probably a bank, even if you say you're this fun technology company that uses blockchain. And I think that when that dawned on people, the ones that really were trying to operate responsibly for society have mostly muddled along, and some of the really slightly dubious ones, like FTX, have crumbled and ended up in court. There's some good podcasts out and around that. But the one I'd recommend is Crypto Critics Corner. It is quite biased. They're not no coiners, but it is biased towards a skeptical view of crypto assets and blockchain. But they go into a lot of depth about some of the audit problems these firms have, how they can never seem to pass financial audits and stuff like that. So that was one element where it started with no one really knew anything, no one had any knowledge, and I imagine that the money laundering was rife there. I definitely think it was overblown, the number of people saying they definitely could show that it was money laundering. I think it was more, oh, I'm scared because I don't understand this. Now I think people are much more balanced. There are people who are subject matter experts in illicit financial flows through crypto assets. Some of the work that the Royal United Services Institute do on this is really, really good. The other one is politically exposed persons. So PEPs had been a hot button issue, a lot of fines thrown about when I started my career, a lot of money spent trying to do the right thing, prevent bribery and corruption, make sure that politicians are monitored correctly. And we're starting to have this proper understanding that not every politician is a baddie, but every politician has the risk of being bribed or being subject to corruption, and they need to be monitored because if they are, then that drives money laundering effectively. So that initial understanding was there. What has changed is that sort of political drama malaise that has happened has driven, I think, a very wonky regulatory, governmental, political discourse problem around PEPs. And I think I'd love us to return to the fact that not all PEPs are bad. PEPs are just normal people who happen to be office holders. They're public officials, they're senior military legal officials. But if you are in that position, particularly if you hold the purse strings of, say, a department in government, you are likely to be approached for things that, were you to have a darker day and agree to do them, could be construed as corruption, or you could take a bribe. If you work in a big sort of extractive minerals or commodities business, you could be bribed. These sorts of concerns, particularly where they interface with the state and business, needs to be risk assessed and need to be managed in a certain way. And I'd like us to get back to a point where we just treat it as risk management rather than a political hooray about, okay, I didn't get an account from say this fintech, and okay, why didn't you get an account from that fintech? Well, that fintech's been around for a year, and that fintech doesn't have the resources to conduct that risk assessment. So the regulators told them, don't take on too much risk that you can't manage. If you're someone in the government, or if you're even a backbench MP, doing a little bit of research and saying, am I being singled out because of my beliefs? Am I being singled out because of who I am? Or is this bank telling me that they can't accept the level of risk? And just, if you think you're being sort of unfairly treated, log a complaint. That's the most easy way to deal with things. But I don't think going to Twitter or on into the media is the most responsible thing. But unfortunately, I think the whole space has become quite toxic, and banks are really, I think, trying to do the right thing, and the regulators trying to do the right thing, the treasurer's trying to do the right thing. But I think we just need to decharge the topic, just get some of the drama away from it and get it back to, we're trying to protect the financial sector and society from bribery and corruption. We don't want to end up like corrupt regimes overseas.
Yes, thank you very much. And two more last questions. Yes. And what advice do you have for students trying to build their careers in financial crime prevention?
Biggest ones for me is, don't try and jump straight in and wait for that straight in jump, because you'll be waiting a long time unless you're in London and you're right there and you have the right mix of attributes. You're very unlikely to get it at your first go. But organically moving into the space, so maybe you start at a contact center and then you see a KYC job, and know your customer job, which is basically checking that the customer is who they say they are, and a range of other checks. That can be a nice backdoor in. Or you can join a graduate scheme. Maybe it's a risk graduate scheme, or maybe it's explicitly financial crime, and work your way up there. But equally, you could be working as a mortgage broker or something, and you decide one day that you want to transition into that space. As long as you can articulate your transferable skills and seek learning where it's available, so you maybe sit a qualification from a recognized body, they tend to be sort of under £1,000. So it's a big investment, but it's not life-changing money for a professional. That can be a route in. And then there's always the route of sideways stepping in. I've seen people who have been operations leaders, so they've come up through maybe they work in payments or something like that, and they use that expertise to move into sanctions, and then they move from sanctions to anti-money laundering. That sort of move is possible, but it's just about not limiting your pathway. So I started in a pensions contact center, moved to a bank contact center, moved onto a bank graduate scheme, moved into a risk team, moved into an operations manager's role, and now I'm a functional lead in a department. I've had different roles in all of those, but the majority of them have had a thread of financial crime, and that's how I've sort of built my career. But that pathway can look very different for very different people. Use LinkedIn, see who's in the sort of jobs you want to do, and then work back for where they studied or what they first did before they changed their job, and that'll usually tell you the good ways to move.
Thank you for your advice. And the last question is, if you could go back in time, would you change anything about your time at University of Aberdeen, or would you give yourself any advice?
Um, Probably enjoy more of what is university, get out of bed more, and um, maybe try and work on mental health a bit more, particularly in the early days. Spent a lot of time masking mental health, and that did not pay dividends when I got into my second year, where I ended up moving away from the business school into politics. That was a consequence of me doing some reflection. Another one is if you do have mental health challenges, just use the counselors. Don't be shy. Tell your friends you're not feeling right. Go and see a counselor. Tell your parents. Just be open, because you don't want to get to an ultimatum point where you need to radically change things. So I resat a year because I changed course. I could have resat some of my exams and stayed in the business school, but I knew that wasn't the right path for me. I only came to that realization after hitting not rock bottom. I mean, I'm come from a well-off family. I was well supported, but emotionally, I was at the end of my tether. And I think if I could give advice to my younger self, it's just don't take it so seriously. It's university. Okay, yes, you've had to repeat a year. Yes, some people might be a little bit sort of upset that you didn't tell them. Very few people will be disappointed. And it's better to just be honest with yourself. You will regret all of the self-hate and stuff like that later in life. And I think also people should just try and unload some of the sort of expectation at university. Go to classes more, don't drink as much, just chill out more with your mates, and try and enjoy things like societies and balls and events more. Because often those things go, oh, I could go on a night out with my mates, or I could go to this non-drinking event where I'm learning about culture from Scotland or something like that. Go to the cultural thing. You can always have another piss up with your mates. Um, so that would be my advice to my younger self. Just actually enjoy university. Don't enjoy just being 20.